Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here with you, and I have another interesting video, or I shouldn't say video, recording for you for this Pride Month. As we are celebrating Pride Month, it is a focus of bringing in more of those places of intersection with not just being LGBT, but also being a person of color. Now, that aside, we also need to get into our classic disclaimers, which is the standpoint that this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes. It does not constitute working with a licensed mental health provider, so please seek out one in your area. So I'm going to introduce you today to someone that we have danced back and forth at various networking events, and at our most recent one, I heard about some of the work that they are doing, and I thought, oh, we need to have this on the program. So I want to introduce you to Dana the TherActivist Johnson, who is a master's social worker and identifies as they, them, and theirs. They are a transgender, non-binary community activist, author, documentary filmmaker, and DEI and B specialist, and a personal development trainer. Dana's an author and filmmaker of the memoir, The TherActivist, They, Them, and Theirs, a narrative embracing identity, intersectionality, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. The TherActivist embodies a therapeutic activist approach while serving and empowering people of color, LGBTQIA+ communities, and marginalized populations. Dana serves as the LGBTQ Commissioner, Pride Initiative Co-Chair, and board member of the Coast Pride LGBT Center for the County of San Mateo. Dana, the TherActivist, is the director of youth housing of Rainbow Community Center, Contra Costa County. That's a mouthful. In this role, they are providing professional development training and resources to county offices of educational staff on the ways to serve LGBTQI+ houseless youth. They also provide emergency housing services to transitional age youth. Dana has 18 years experience counseling and serving justice involving youth. They are motivated in assisting in the implementation of inclusive policies and protocols, and passionate about providing LGBTQ+ equity services, social justice, and activism to marginalized communities. For more details, regarding the therapist, visit the TherActivist.com. So Dana, welcome to Untying Knots.
Thank you so much for having me, Perry, and thank you for reading the bio, sharing with your community here about a little bit about me. Hello there to Untying Knots community. Thank you for having me as well.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. So as I always started with the question is like, how did you get here?
Well, hearing that bio, it took some time to get where I'm at. But honestly, I would say back when I was actually young, as in high school, I started my activism role and was really trying to uplift at that time LGBTQ+ athletes, more so playing basketball for the women's basketball team that I went to Berkeley High at, and uplifting at that time those that may identify within she, her pronouns or identifying more cisgender women, lesbians, and just wanted to really uplift that and uplift, the diversity there. And then it took me on a whole realm to when I got to college and I learned how the work that I was doing was really highly impacted in a lot of my social work dreams and the passion I have for social work and activism. And so I ended up continuously working to there and doing a lot of advocating in a lot of some pro bono spaces, to kind of create a little bit of visibility and representation for myself, and then brought me into the place to where I'm hopefully journey now and continuously in that journey. I do want to uplift that my first actual community work was done with Hayward Lambda's Youth Gay Prom. And that was my first actual, want to say, official LGBTQ plus job / community work, servicing young folks. I enjoy and I'm so passionate about really trying to uplift and support services representation for our youth that are identifying as LGBTQ plus, and those that are intersecting as POC. And so that really brought me even more of a closer walk with doing the work specifically for LGBTQ plus community members. And it was pretty impactful, being a fresh new social worker at that time and really being able to engage with community and learn more about the diversity within the social work background.
Very nice. And how did the name TherActivist come into being?
Haha. So TherActivist stands for therapeutic activism. And within that umbrella, I do a lot of, I want to say, community healing type of engaging in my activism. I think that when folks kind of look at advocacy, they look at the physical constraints and the physical part of that. But I'm not sure how many folks understand and see the mental component of that as well. And the engaging of, your care, your self-care, working on your mental capacity so that you can give back and do this type of physical type of advocating and helping engaging in community healing. And so if you were to meet me and engage with me, you would understand that everything that I kind of consume, especially based on my social work background, is really in more of that therapeutic type of a component. And so I highly support and engage with various different therapeutic and holistic healing for yourself. Definitely think that that's a good motivator, and I think it's a very good help for folks that may be dealing with some things. And then just was trying to see how you can tie that into activism. And that's kind of where it came with the therapeutic activism, TherActivist. And it's just like, besides a movement that I'm trying to do, but then also just more of an engagement of, the work that is being done in so many different areas of activism. I think, as I shared, folks look at it one way of doing advocacy, but there's so many, I think, other ways that it can be done. And I'm just trying to uplift the therapeutic activism part of that advocacy. So that's where it all came from.
Very nice. I'm just kind of curious, how would you deal with those in our field, and also depending on when they were trained and where they were trained, who feel that activism isn't part of our role?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question that you came up with, and it's very, very of truth. Some folks feel that way. But I wouldn't say, when I try to do this work, I really look at the fluidity in it. And so it would, for me, it's not that it's not part of our role. I think that our role, besides trying to support folks individually, I think trying to support groups and marginalized spaces also. So that's kind of how I tie it to where, yeah, it is my role. I'm an advocate. I'm a community activist. And so how can I engage and help uplift community that I'm actually empowering and that I'm working with? And so, people have their right to feel how they feel, but I do think that, when you're looking at a person and you're working with them individually, they may intersect in a bigger type of a space. And if you're really trying to support that person, then I think that trying to see, how they intersect, that is part of your role. And if they're intersecting in bigger, larger support groups and services, then you are kind of doing that work. But how folks feel, I mean,
Hmm.
I feel differently, but
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I asked that because I just also think about the varieties of images that come up for what it means for us to do this work
Mhm.
and where that energy gets put. And some would say we're not here to be activists, but yet, many ways, as you just described, we are activists at the same
Mhm.
time. And what is, and that's one of those things of where that's being dictated is something we have to look inside ourselves for. Do we want to stay in some sort of little box, or do we want to be in this broader place? But that's something that we figure out as we do this work.
And it looks different for everyone, but the hope is, as me and you are sharing that, we really see, besides like the different avenues of folks that may be in therapy, the kind of maybe things that aren't visible is that
Hmm.
advocacy. And I
Hmm.
wonder how many people, look at those type of parts when doing this
Hmm.
work.
And is that what has led to you creating your book and film?
Well, thank you for tying that in. I would say, yes, visibility was a very big key of that. The book is a memoir, so it touches on my lived experience, but goes deeper, kind of a look of identity, intersectionality, diversity,
Hmm.
that equity, inclusion, trans visibility, um,
Hmm.
pronouns, and then how to engage with transgender non-binary folks. I've noticed being transgender non-binary and identifying as that, um, folks always kind of have to feel like they need to put me in a box of being transmasculine or
Hmm.
and that's just it. And so what my hope is through the book and film is to really educate folks on the non-binary community, on the fluidity of us, on that being what's looked upon as a third gender, um,
Hmm.
and then a little bit of the lived experiences. The intersectional pieces you can see is that I'm Black, LGBTQ plus community member, so trans
Hmm.
non-binary, but also how educated and having a master's in social work. A lot of folks see me and they see my dreadlocks, and the
Hmm.
first thing that they think is criminal or
Hmm.
other type of, I would say, not pleasant
Undereducated.
things. Very
Yeah.
much so. And then when I'm engaging in terror and telling them, oh, I got a master's in social work, and then it goes into oh, well, you're not like the others that maybe.
Mm.
And so I'm really trying to uplift us that have locks that, don't judge us just based on how we look or from our environments. I come from a very marginalized, impoverished urban community, being
Hmm.
raised in Oakland. And so when I'm in some of my conservative spaces, it's like you're from Oakland. It's really like for me, it's like wow, how they have already judged based on what you think folks from Oakland should look or should be acting for. And
Hmm.
it's like, you know, don't just judge us just based off of you hear those things. And then, talking about those that may be within religion and that
Hmm.
spiritual space. I
Hmm.
was raised Pentecostal, and being an LGBTQ plus person in the Pentecostal church was really a big trauma that I had to go through. And so I really touch on that too, just to try to again help be affirming to those that may have these same intersectional identities and may have these same things they went through, and just how you can empower each other that may have been going through, a lot of different triggers from just
Hmm.
being wanting to be authentically who you were.
Hmm. Hmm. And so, as you're going through each of these various things in both the filmmaking and the book, how do you sort of create the tone for it or set the tone for it?
So, um, I would say I was very motivated to get my story out there.
Hmm.
Everyone might have been going through a various different type of journey, but they all have
Hmm.
their story. Um, also I was starting this right, I want to say probably the year before the pandemic hit. Then the pandemic hit when I was trying to capture all my footage and write at the same time. So the shelter in place actually may have helped because there was really not much you could do but sit and kind of write. And then the film is a short documentary. And so just gathering all those images together and then working with very small team to put out a pretty amazing documentary. So what people have told me. So, you know, that probably was, I want to say, the support there.
And where are people able to find the documentary if they want to be able to have a chance to watch it, if they've gotten their hands on the book so far?
Thank you for asking that. So if you are interested in the documentary, me and my co-filmmaker, we show this based on screenings. And so organizations or folks or people can reach out to me from our website, which is www.TherActivist.com. And basically you can put in an interest of wanting to bring that film to your space. And then I set up the contracts of it. But right now, because I'm trying to protect my intellectual property, I have not put it on any mainstream sites or anything. So,
right. Well, maintaining that control is an important one, as Michaela Cole more than showed was, especially with that dance with capitalism. So, what does it feel like dealing with this aspect of intersectionality with these many intersections that we have, considering for some it is so easy to say that there's only maybe one box or one place or one intersection of identity as opposed to multiple intersections of identity?
I think my hope is that folks can progress from just trying to see things in one box. Like I think when people are looking at identity or intersectionality as pieces too, it's very black and white. And I don't think that they get the fluidity and the gray of that and how, these identities, these intersectional identities, they're constantly evolving. So my identities may grow and I just don't know if people understand that and I think also I don't think people understand when really engaging and getting to understand and know a person, you have to look at their intersectional makeup. So you can't just look at just maybe those that are visible, but those that are invisible too, to really, engage with a person and really get to know them. If you are servicing them, really understand them. So there's a lot of binary in our society, in our system. And I'm hoping that the progression could be more movement into, there's a lot of non-binary out there. And then looking at that, if we bring it back to our intersectional pieces and our intersectionality, that can be also, there's a lot of non-binary and intersectionality. So just not trying to make it like you need to just be here in this box and here in this box, and that's okay. But what about those that will be in between both of those boxes? Like, how do you bring visibility to them? How do you make them feel belonged and included?
And that's part of the DIE and B, because I'll admit that's the first time I've seen DIE and B. So I was wondering, so the belonging. So let's talk about that, because I'm sure at this point day and age, if if people are out there, they're aware of diversity and inclusion work. But tell us a little bit more about adding the B portion into it, the belonging portion.
Right. So the belonging part is something that I think just with other community leaders that I'm working with that's doing this work for the past few years have really been trying to uplift more. And so like you shared, the diversity, equity, inclusion part, I think folks are starting to get along and understanding of that. But then looking broader on it is for you to really say that you're accepting that person and bringing them to the table, and for you to really say that you are being fully representative, you have to let that person feel that they're belonged as well. And so you can bring me to the table just to say that you have me there. But if you're not hearing my voice, or if you're not letting me express and try to bring the work that I'm doing to the space, then I'm not belonged there. So I'm there maybe just to check off a box for you within a DEI, but am I belonged there? Are you accepting me there? So a lot of times I would say, I've noticed within LGBTQ spaces that I'm in, but non-LGBTQ spaces, yeah, we want someone in our non-LGBTQ plus space that identify in the umbrella, but I'm not accepted and belonged in that space. So when I am bringing my voice, it's not listened to, or when I'm bringing up things, I'm not even called on to express it. But one of my peers that maybe don't identify as LGBTQI plus, they are accepted there. They'll bring their voice and they'll say some of the same things I'm saying, and that's accepted. But then it's as if when I'm saying things, I'm not even like being listened to. So the hope is that with the belonging piece of that, is that I'm not just being brought, but I'm also being a part of that change. I'm part of that community there. I think there's someone that was sharing me something that you're either a part of the table, or you're a part of that space, or you're on the menu. And so the hope is for me that the belonging piece looks like I'm not so much more on the menu, but now I'm a part of that greater change.
That is very deep, and that's also the idea that we're on the menu is not exactly a message that's usually talked about being at these tables, let alone the idea of building your own table too.
Yeah.
Which you can see how in its own way feeds back into the idea of being the TherActivist.
Yeah. Trying to build my table for others that aren't usually belonged in spaces, and trying to see how, as a community, we can be a part of those, I guess I would say, larger type of spaces that's really making those changes. That's what I'm hoping. So I'm really striving to be a part and belong in those spaces and be heard, and be accepted, and be listened to. That's the TherActivist whole motivation.
So to that end, and also noticing that in your bio, a lot of your work has been done with youth, which is a place where there should be natural curiosity and natural growth, natural questioning. What made you focus there versus in the other areas, especially with this work?
Well, I say a lot of my work have been with youth, but some of it is with adults as well. The work that I do with the Pride Initiative, that's sternly more so with adults, and that's looking into health equity initiative services for adult and older adult community members. I would like to say though, the reason of the focus too for the youth is because a lot of times the belonging piece of their voices aren't being brought to the space, especially when we're looking at things that are of affected to them. Like the work I'm doing with LGBTQIA plus houseless youth. A lot of those bigger meetings I'm at, the youth voice is not being brought up at all, and they're not being accepted or belonged in that space. But that's who we're really trying to service. So when you want to hear from them on how we can better service and support their needs, and so that's kind of why focus with working with the youth and the younger peoples, because I'm really trying to uplift and empower the importance of their voice as well in some of these spaces. And that's also another real strong battle. I'm hoping that a lot of places can really do this type of transcend from being inclusive to expansive. Because I think once we become more expansive, then at that time, then all these various different voices and representation will feel belonged and heard.
It makes me wonder, why are we having so much of this issue of not having these voices heard and understood? Because I know this has come up in other talks I've had with other people and so forth. And I'm just kind of curious, what is it that seems to keep those voices from being heard and understood and accepted, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I think like it's as if adults don't want to hear the youth voice. It's like they're checking off a box, like, oh, well, we're taking care of this. Good. And on to the next thing, or don't want to actually uplift and empower like these other marginalized subgroups that are important. And if I'm speaking with the youth, that's number one. If I'm in a meetings and it's like, well, we'll work on getting a youth here, or we'll work on getting a youth type of advisory board or community board to give that representation. And then it's like, it's a group of adults that's all maybe having their own internal like thing of power dynamics that they want, and not even understanding that, that power is what's standing in the way of us really supporting and doing good work with the youth. It's kind of a privilege, to be honest. It's like, it's a privilege of an adulthood that they have. And it's like, well, I don't want to hear from a younger person. They're not saying this, but when you're not accepting and allowing them to come into the space, that's basically what you're saying. And so maybe understanding the privilege of that too. I think, those privileges that we don't see. One could be adult and how you may feel when a young person is around. You don't see how much privilege you have in that space. And then are you allowing that youth there?
Or even the aspect of, because let's be frank, fundamentally, at one point, that adult was a kid. And obviously, with that standpoint of now they get to be heard versus where they were in the head, it's like, how it sort of brings that aspect of what caused them to lose the perspective, to lose the empathy.
It could be that maybe when they were youth, like you said, they weren't heard. And so they picked up that notion and they picked up that type of feeling as if maybe another youth don't need to be heard. And maybe they should step outside of maybe some things that may be triggering them and see how, they can be more transformative in that area and really help. Because I think they could be that. Who knows what trauma folks are bringing with them that they may have went through as a young person, and their voice is not being heard and maybe being shut down. And that takes some work that they got to really do on themselves to work on that. Maybe they were told that your voice isn't something that is of an importance. And I'm sorry if they were. But I think maybe we can try to be more expansive and change that whole thing that, these voices aren't of importance. Maybe that'll kind of gear us to some better, good all around social justice work where everyone feels belong.
And who better to do that than a TherActivist?
I hope so, Perry. I hope so. It sounds like some big shoes to fill, but I'm trying one day at a time.
Very much so. I think that's a perfect place for us to take a break here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dana the TherActivist, they, them, and we'll be back shortly for the second half. So stay tuned, folks.
Follow Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Enjoying our shows and can't get enough of us? Follow us on Instagram at Voice America Talk Radio and see what we're cooking up for you.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dana the TherActivist, master social worker, and they, them. So in our first half, we talked a bit about where the name TherActivist came from, what the work of a TherActivist has been, a bit about the filmmaking and book that is connected to all of that. But let's get a little more into the work. So I mentioned that you work with a lot of youth. What has been your experience being the TherActivist, working with youth and especially LGBT youth?
Well, it's amazing working with LGBTQ plus youth. Being that voice and that representation kind of that they're hoping that they can have out there. Also, the support for those youth that aren't really out and may be feeling unsafe, and how I can help support them with, finding safe spaces and being comfortable in who they are. So I think youth, working with them, because it's something, it's kind of like it's something different every day. It's an amazing group to work with. They teach me just like I'm trying to teach them and trying to help them. So I think that work is great. I've worked with youth in so many different capacities and so many different spaces. Needed be with working with foster youth, system involved youth, and then some now youth that are houseless, and just really seeing they are our future, and how can we better support and help them and create better spaces for them in the capacity that we can.
And what have you been seeing much more about their mental health too, being in these experiences of being sadly on the street, being houseless?
Yes. I think their mental health has been real kind of bad, I've noticed, with especially those that are houseless, not knowing where your next meal is going to come from, or just shelter in some safe space to lay your head down, and the trauma and the mental challenges that may bring, and then not even really being in a space where you can kind of like get the support for those mental health challenges. And some of it, these youth have been kind of houseless for a while and going in and out of like various different systems, and the trauma that they're bringing, and then not even finding a space of where they can get support to work through that. So I've seen some youth that have really needed some mental health services very strongly. And it just so happened in the space that I'm in, we do wraparound services to where I can try to pin them into a clinician or a therapist. I can only help so many that I see based on, how various different funding streams are. So I'm really concerned with that population, and there's so much that they got to deal with trauma wise, and then some challenges that they may have had that they still hold with them, the burnout, and then you see the substance abuse used to try to cope with those various different things in the mental health. It's really sad, Perry. And so, I'm hoping as I know doing a lot of this work just within the state of California, I'm hoping that, we can really look at better servicing LGBTQ plus houses, and providing those various different, really important wraparound pieces of getting them clinical support as well.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine one of the things that also complicates this is the relationship with law enforcement too.
Yes, which is another unfortunate intersectional pieces some of them hold. I've actually had to work with some houseless youth that just to get some type of shelter, they would commit a crime because they knew that they will be, in some type of a space, maybe warehouse, as we would call it, but still getting 3 meals a day. And then when they're there, let's say if they do kind of identify and express their identity as one, of course, already being houseless, but then also being LGBTQ plus, not treated very well. And believe it or not, if we're looking at it from, let's say, like a DEIB type of space, just for those youth in those type of spaces, the LGBTQIA plus youth are not belonged in more of the overall type of youth population that may be in some of those spaces. And so that deepens our conversation of the belonging piece. That why is it always that LGBTQIA plus folks in whatever space they are in, even in these type of systems that traditionally are not very supportive of POC community members. But let's say if you're a LGBTQ plus and you are not identified as POC, no, you're not accepted, even in some of those juvenile justice maybe spaces with law enforcement. So again, some work that really needs to be done. Perry, it really needs to be done. I think the governor is trying to make a better pipeline for youth that may be within the juvenile justice system. But then I don't know if the intersectional piece of those youth that are identified as LGBTQ plus are also being considered of servicing within those various pipelines.
So I know this is also a tall ask, but for those who are not already in our field for doing this type of work, can you help them understand more about what that experience and identity or that our intersectional identity that our youth are encountering in these settings?
Okay, and I'm going to be just very transparent, so hopefully this isn't triggering to anyone. But I would say if a lot of the folks that may be working in the spaces of juvenile justice that I have learned even have a background of criminal justice work services, administration of criminal justice, or maybe political science type of a background. So I'm sharing that to say very strongly law background, very strongly punitive, not very understanding of rehabilitative, not very understanding of evidence-based services, and how that can better support, especially our vulnerable population of LGBTQ plus youth. And so I share that to say ignorance is very, very seen there, and the supportive language is not at all. And so if you are engaging with folks that may be within the trans community. The language that I've heard in some of those spaces have been very terrible. I do think too that the wraparound services within that area is not very accepted and belong. So they have had like clinicians and therapists that I would say juvenile justice is trying to work closely with to better service within the actual maybe detention centers or systems that are, but it's a power dynamic in there to where the various law enforcement officers may feel, that there's only so much that the therapist should be allowed to do, or there's just only so much work that should be done. There's definitely boundaries and barriers that I see law enforcement trying to put on the other side with those that are doing the clinical work. And again, understanding the intersectional breakdown, how are you really servicing these young people in these various different detention centers and systems if you're not even allowing those that really are trying to do that therapeutic and clinical work and giving them that opportunity to do that? They try to put a lot of barriers on what can and how those services should look in these systems.
Or even that the way that what is the idealized version of them being rehabilitated looks like.
And who are you talking to? Because if you're talking to the law enforcement side, it looks real different on what they feel rehabilitation should look like. And I think on the clinical side,
Not to mention also, because you mentioned it earlier, on the funding side.
That part, because again, depending on a lot of these grant funding, what can you offer? And can you just check off the box for those those larger grantors? And then really honestly, they like to see, and it's so, to me, sometimes it's so sad, the data collecting of how we're doing these things. And looking at the quantitative and qualitative aspects, the numbers help grantors see how they can better give funding to those that are a little bit less marginalized, I would say. So basically, if you have a lot of youth that you're servicing that may be victims of crimes, need to be hate crimes or whichever that may be, or how that show up, then you could get maybe a little bit more funding. But if they are not identifying as folks with victims of crime, then you may not even get that funding stream to support, houseless youth. So it's for me, it's remarkable of how it's like looked upon. It's like, well, if you're houseless, are you also a victim of crime? Because I'll fund that. But if you're just houseless, I'll try to give some services, but you're not really like going through that much.
Right.
I know. I know.
Which can be so self-defeating because it sort of keeps a way of perpetuating deeper problems, or the aspect of, someone's got to actually open themselves up to take on more problems just to get the help.
Yeah, and if you think about it, with a lot of the houseless youth, they're not very vulnerable. I mean, they've been through so much. So you're asking them to kind of give pieces of them that they probably never given and probably did give and was taken advantage of for giving that. But then a lot of the funders feel we need that if you want us to fund.
I wonder then if there a part of this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about that box. That there is a certain box and image about what that box is that's influencing not just the funders, but as you mentioned, the law enforcement. And the nature of what we're talking about and some of the things people are looking to heal isn't necessarily about the the certain image of vulnerability.
Yeah, I think so, and I think you're dead on it with that box part. If you can intersect in a lot of different, really disproportionate type of things that you receive, and not of maybe more supportive advantage,
Mm-hmm.
then it's sad, but that's what they want. They need to check those boxes off, maybe to the folks that are providing the various different larger funding for them to provide to the
Mm-hmm.
smaller spaces. It's a whole pipeline system that's very, very interesting, but challenging and, you know, not service based, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And I know you've already finished filming and all of that, but I think would we see some of that in your work in the both the book and in the film?
I think you see in the book and film, a lot of I would say, parts of things that I've done and tried to make some change in,
Mm-hmm.
um, and probably where we still need to do a lot of work on, especially with the work within the trans non-binary community.
Mm-hmm.
I touch on a little bit about Transgender Day of Remembrance as well, um, and just the call of action that the hope is around that. I think again, that's more and more each year. The numbers of those that are being murdered just for
Mm-hmm.
being their authentic self
Mm-hmm.
is growing. And so my work is really focused too on, again, the safety of
Mm-hmm.
trans and non-binary folks, um, and that visibility piece of it. I talk to some people and I share that I'm trans, non-binary, and they don't even really know what non-binary is. And so it's also an educational piece of that. And then the
Mm-hmm.
pronoun use. We haven't really touched on that much about pronouns,
Mm-hmm.
but it's remarkable about the pronouning. And if you were to just identify as binary pronouns of she and he, or him and her,
Mm-hmm.
that's okay because people are comfortable with usage of that. But when you start to use they them pronouns, um, that is not very accepted in a lot of these more heteronormative systems that I'm either engaging in or working in. Um, I'll go to some spaces and just say my pronouns, and it's a question, and folks are looking, and no one else in that space either
Mm-hmm.
say what their pronouns are. So again, that's some work that the TherActivist is doing, is trying to normalize things like pronoun usage in a lot of different heteronormative spaces.
Well, I think this is also a lovely segue into the myths and realities around mental health. And most especially, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think are the myths and realities around mental health from that standpoint of the non-binary, the pronoun usage side of things?
So a myth, I would say, and this is something as a non-binary person that I'm also noticing with my intersectional as being Black, is that um, I don't need therapy. I don't need
Mm-hmm.
to go to see a therapist. I don't need a clinician. Um, I should just go to my community church, talk to a community pastor. I think also the myth of you know mental health is something that we it's kind of like not visible. It's like, oh well, we don't
Mm-hmm.
have those issues. That's not.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's pertained on race, and then sometimes a specific type of gender where that race might have that issue, or
Mm-hmm.
those that identify in that gender. And so sometimes it's placed on, well, you probably have this mental health issue because you identify as trans, non-binary, and folks that want to transition clearly they have to have some mental health issues. And it's
Right.
like, wow, so I think that's some of that. And
Well,
hopefully that's on the line of the thing you were trying to ask here.
well, I think it is. And I think conversation I was having with a client yesterday, they were asking about the aspect of mental health and growth and recognizing challenges. And I had to say, if we were looking at things on a scale of 0 being having done absolutely nothing in relation to DEI and B, dealing with LGBT and so forth, to being 10, that we were absolutely on our game as our field and profession, I would probably say we're maybe at a 5. The legal system is probably at a 2.
Mm-hmm.
There was one other system I was thinking of that was equally, I didn't think had moved forward enough and had made that effort, that it was still literally living in the last century, or should I say 2 centuries ago, that our profession is still working with that and still struggling. And that even goes back to my question too about the idea about the TherActivist, that our job as therapists, mental health workers, isn't to be activists, or at least some particular image of an activist, versus being here trying to save people.
But you can also be saving people by advocating for the services that they need.
Very
I would
true.
say that.
Very true.
And maybe looking at the thing, like especially in those spaces like law enforcement, where it's a 2, how can we advocate the importance of that mental health component being there to at least try to bring it to a 5? Because I agree, we are centuries back when law enforcement, I guess they're trying to progress, but their progression goes very slow compared to a lot of different other systems I've noticed. Very
and
slow.
And is very much still tied in thinking that does not fit where we are here now and dealing with the issues we are dealing with here and now.
Very correct, very true, and I think it has to first start with seeing people as actually humans and not just like test animals. And I say that to say, in a lot of the work, that the language that they're using, the inhabitant or something they'll say, or they'll say the insubordinate or the responsive, or just the wording of how it's not putting this person as a person, but it's more of putting this person in a box of, more criminalized or just dehumaning them.
As an object.
Exactly. Which is not okay. But I think, again, that's that system. And that's, they don't see it outside of an object. And it's just sad because it's not just working the work with adults, right? But then also youth, A lot of those juvenile justice systems, unfortunately, that I've been engaged in, the objectivism starts there, and it's like they're trying to pipeline them to being adult criminals instead of trying to, stop the recidivism rate. It's you're objecting them to make them feel as if, they should continue and they should go on to the adult system.
So I come to the question is, did the system fail, or did the system do what it was designed to do?
And it depends on who you have in that talk with, because to me, I think the system is failing a lot. But to those that are maybe trying to get funding to keep these systems open, they would feel no. And that they will actually feel that, some of them are doing evidence-based services. So they are taking steps towards what we'll be looking at as rehabilitative. But even with those evidence-based services, you're not actually looking into all various different identities and intersectional pieces. And so you may be just trying to do a whole data service or a whole service to just serve one community, but then you're not looking at all the various different folks that may be made up within this system that might identify with different communities. So,
and have different relationships, which means they also have different, let's call it, metrics on what it means to trust, what it means to be vulnerable.
And that is big if we tie it back to working with young people, youth. That trust, if you've broken that, and unfortunately, if sometimes cases, any adult has broken that trust for this young person, trying to get that vulnerability is going to be very, very hard. And it's just really, for me, it's disheartening because, like, how am I able to try to work if there's already been an adult that has broken this trust that this young person had and now felt, for survival and for their safety, they can't be vulnerable.
And that's something to think about. And that's something that I think even as your work as a TherActivist is something that you account for.
Well, thank you. I'm trying. And that's the activism in that space because I'm advocating, for us to try as providers to kind of like you said, take them outside of this box and see this person and their intersectional identities and that they make up. And how can I service this person as a whole? How they come and how they're engaging. How can I service to probably try to build trust again in this person? Try to make this person feel that I'm a safe adult.
Well, where would you like people to contact you at and share with, especially as we wrap up for this Pride Month and continue this work, which Pride is not just the month of June, just like Black History Month is not just the month of February. It is every single day of the year.
That's right.
Living with it. This just happens with time we get to, put on the good suits, put on the fanfare a bit more, but we live that every single day of the year.
That's right. Thank you for saying that, Perry. We do. We're prideful 365 days a year. So that's right. It shows up every day. But I would say if you're looking for me and want to kind of engage more and kind of hear about my work, best space would be maybe my website, which is www.theractivist.com. I would say also, if you're looking at social media spaces, on LinkedIn, I'm Dana TherActivist Johnson. On Instagram, Dana TherActivist. And then Facebook, Dana TherActivist too. So I would just say, if you put into your Google search, I do come up and pop up on Google at TherActivist. That's at TherActivist. And you can find me. I'm out there. And thank you again, Perry, for having me. This was wonderful. It was wonderful engaging and having this conversation with you.
Thank you for joining us and being here and to share and continue to support that aspect of being that intersection we are in and our various types. And we need more of us to be able to recognize that we're also TherActivists too.
Agreed. You can come on over to the movement. I'm taking all that's interested.
All righty then. So you heard that, folks. There's your call. So stay tuned for more episodes. We have one more episode coming to wrap up Pride Month, which I hope that one's going to be a fun one too. Different slant and definitely something that hopefully gets to our blurredness, or at least just our geekness. Is that? But we have more coming up, and hope everyone is safe and this Pride season.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.